Ray Charles grabbed Lionel Richie's hand in a recording studio in 1982 and said, "I can't see you, but when I hear your voice, I see colors, yellow, gold, amber, the warmest colors there are." Lionel drove home that night and sat at the piano, and for the first time in his life, he wrote music by thinking about color. Ray Charles had been blind since he was 7 years old. Glaucoma had taken his sight gradually, the way certain losses arrive, not all at once but in increments, each one a little more than the last, until the thing being lost is gone completely, and what remains is the specific knowledge of what it was like before the losing. He had learned to navigate the world without the visual information that most people use to understand where they are and who is around them and what the room they are in looks like, had developed, in place of that information, the other senses with the specific acuity that comes when one sense is removed and the remaining ones are required to do more than they were designed for. His hearing, in particular, had become something extraordinary, not merely acute in the way that blind people's hearing is sometimes described as acute, sharper than average, more attentive, but genuinely extraordinary in the sense of being capable of things that most hearing is not capable of. He could locate a person in a room by sound alone with the precision of someone who can see them. He could identify the specific quality of an acoustic space, the dimensions of a room, the materials of its walls, the presence or absence of soft furnishings from the way sound moved through it. He could hear things in music that trained musicians with perfect sight struggled to identify. He had spent 60 years listening to the world with an intensity that most people never develop because they do not need to, and the listening had produced in him a relationship with sound that had no adequate category in the ordinary language available for describing what hearing can do. Lionel Richie arrived at the recording studio on the afternoon in question for a session that had nothing to do with Ray Charles, a session for a project he was working on, one of the many professional engagements that filled the calendar of someone at his stage of a music career, the accumulation of commitments and collaborations that constituted the working life of a songwriter and producer operating at the level he was operating at in 1982. He was 32 years old. Can't Slow Down had not yet been recorded. Hello had not yet been written, or rather had been begun in the specific way that songs are sometimes begun years before they are finished, as a fragment, an idea, a melody that existed in the interior without yet having found the form it needed to become something real. He was successful, recognized at the peak of his professional powers. He was also, in the specific way of artists who are between the work that has established them and the work that will define them, still reaching for something he had not yet entirely found.
The corridor of the recording studio was where it happened. He was moving between rooms, between his session and wherever he was going next, when he became aware of Ray Charles ahead of him in the hallway. Ray was moving with the specific confidence of someone who has navigated spaces without visual input for long enough that the absence of sight has ceased to be a limitation and has become simply the condition within which navigation happens, unhurried, certain, following the internal map that his other senses had constructed of the space around him. Someone introduced them. The introduction was brief. Names exchanged in the specific way of people who already know who each other is and do not require the introduction to be more than a formality. Ray Charles did not need to be told who Lionel Richie was. He had been listening. That was what Ray Charles did. He listened with the full force of a sensory apparatus that had been refined over 6 decades into something capable of hearing not just the notes, but the person behind the notes. Not just the melody, but the emotional territory from which the melody had emerged. Ray reached out and found Lionel's hand, not the formal handshake of a professional introduction, but something more deliberate, the specific gesture of someone who is gathering information through touch that they cannot gather through sight, who is extending the range of what they can know about the person they are meeting beyond what sound alone provides. He held Lionel's hand for a moment. He was quiet, And then he said the thing. He said, "I can't see you, but when I hear your voice, I see colors." He paused. Then, yellow, gold, amber, the warmest colors there are. Lionel did not immediately know what to say. The statement had the specific quality of something that arrives in a language you understand individually, but that, assembled in this particular combination, produces a meaning that requires time to fully receive. He understood each word. He understood what colors were. He understood what it meant to hear something in a voice. But the combination, the specific claim that Ray Charles, who had not seen a color in more than 50 years, was seeing colors in Lionel's voice, landed with the particular weight of something true, said in an unexpected form, something that the ordinary frame of professional interaction had not prepared him to receive. He asked, "What colors?" He asked it not to be polite, not to keep the conversation going, but because he genuinely needed to know, because something in the specificity of Ray's answer had produced in him the specific hunger for more specificity that genuinely interesting things produce. Ray said, "Warm ones, the kind that stay after the sun goes down. Not the bright ones, not the ones that announce themselves, the ones that linger, the ones that are still there when everything else has gone dark." He released Lionel's hand. He continued down the corridor with the same unhurried certainty with which he had been moving before the encounter. The conversation was over, not because it had reached a conclusion, but because Ray had said what he had to say and was moving on, the way people move on when they have delivered something and trust that the delivery is sufficient, that the thing said will do whatever it is going to do without requiring further management.
Lionel stood in the corridor for a moment after Ray had gone. He was thinking about colors, not about music, not in the first moment, not in the analytical way of a professional assessing new information about his own work. He was thinking about the specific colors Ray had named: yellow, gold, amber. He was thinking about what those colors had in common, the warmth of them, the specific quality of light that produces them, the way they exist in the world at the edges of brighter things, in the hour after sunset and the hour before dawn, and the specific glow of a lamp in a dark room. He was thinking about what it would mean to write music that had that quality, not the bright declarative quality of music that announces itself, but the lingering quality of colors that stay after everything else has gone dark. He drove home. He sat at the piano. He had been sitting at pianos for most of his life, had learned to play on his grandmother Adelaide's piano in Tuskegee, had developed his compositional instinct through years of sitting at keyboards and following whatever the melody was reaching for. He knew what it felt like to sit at a piano and write. What he did not know, had not done before this particular evening, was to sit at a piano and try to write a color. He played, not with a song in mind, not with a lyrical idea or a structural concept, or any of the conventional starting points from which songs begin. He played with the colors in mind. He played warm. He played the specific quality of amber light in a dark room, the way it illuminates without blinding, the way it makes the space around it visible without making itself the center of the space. He played the quality of gold at dusk, the color that the sky becomes in the 20 minutes after sunset, when the direct light is gone, but its warmth is still present in the atmosphere, still visible in the clouds, still creating the specific feeling of something beautiful that is ending slowly rather than all at once. What came out of the piano that evening was the beginning of something, not a finished song, not yet, not that night, but the beginning of a melodic idea that had a quality he had not produced before, that had the specific warmth and the specific lingering quality that Ray's words had described. A melody that did not announce itself, but arrived gradually, that built in the way that warmth builds, not suddenly, but continuously, each moment slightly warmer than the last, until the warmth is the whole experience, and the absence of it would be immediately felt. He worked on it for 2 years. The melody evolved, and the lyric found itself, and the structure revealed what it needed to be through the patient process of revision that serious songs require. The process of discovering, through many iterations of what the song almost is, what it actually is. When Hello was released in 1984, it went to #1 in 43 countries. It spent 6 weeks at the top of the American charts. It became one of the most recognized melodies in the history of popular music, a song that people who had never heard of Lionel Richie knew, that existed in the cultural air in the specific way of things that have been heard so many times that they feel like they were always there.
Lionel has said in various accounts of how Hello was written that it came from a place he could not entirely explain, that the melody arrived with a quality of emotional directness that his other songs, however successful, had not quite achieved, and that he could not fully account for where that quality came from. What he has not said, what lives in the private accounting of how the song actually began, is that it began in a corridor, with a blind man holding his hand and describing the colors he heard in his voice, warm ones, the kind that stay after the sun goes down. Ray Charles died in 2004. He had spent 73 years navigating the world without sight and had produced in those years some of the most significant music in the history of American popular culture. He had heard things that people with full sight could not hear, and he had described what he heard with a precision that made the description itself a form of art. He had told Lionel Richie in a corridor in 1982 that his voice made warm colors, yellow, gold, amber, and that those colors were among the most courageous things he had ever encountered, because they did not demand attention, but rewarded it, because they did not announce themselves, but lingered, because they were still there after everything else had gone dark. Hello is still there. 40 years after its release, it is still playing somewhere, on a radio, on a streaming service, in the specific interior space where music lives when it has been heard by someone who needed it. Warm colors, the kind that stay after the sun goes down. Ray Charles heard them in Lionel's voice before Lionel had written the song that would make them audible to everyone else. That is what it means to listen the way Ray Charles listened, to hear not what is there yet, but what is going to be there. Not the song that has been written, but the song that is waiting to be written, in the warm and lingering colors of a voice that has not yet fully found what it is reaching for. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Share this with someone who has ever seen something in you that you couldn't yet see in yourself, because sometimes the most important gift another person can give you is not advice or opportunity, but simply the honest description of what they perceive, delivered in a corridor, in the specific language of someone who has been listening more carefully than anyone else in the room. Leave a comment below. What color do you think Lionel Richie's music is? And don't forget to ring the notification bell for more stories about the moments between the music, the corridors, and the hands, and the colors that only certain people can hear.